Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Kim Miller. She's the Vice President of Industry Advisory at iCertis. Hey, good to have you with us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And you know, there's an old saying, and this is especially true in the government to the tune of $700 billion a year, nothing happens till somebody buys something. Well, in the government, nobody buys anything until there's a contract.
That's true.
And so the activity of contracting and writing contracts and administering contracts and understanding what's in contracts is huge for the government. And you have looked at this in terms of how that can be made more efficient. Give us the overview of contracting as a process and how it looks.
Happy to do that. First, if you don't mind, I do want to give you a little bit about my background too. Because before I joined iCertis, I actually spent over 26 years in the industry of aerospace and defense, primarily in government contracting, so on the sub-tier supply chain side of it. So I've got that experience as I'm looking at it from the industry and then coming into iCertis. So my view of contracting might be slightly different than just a standard iCertis practitioner and somebody that's been involved in the industry from that perspective. So as I'm looking at contracting and contracting in general, and from the iCertis perspective, we look at it from a life cycle. And we're not just solving for a point in this life cycle, we're actually looking at it from its totality. So we're not just looking at the execution of an agreement and then the obligations and requirements of an agreement. We're actually looking at it from the very beginning at the time of the acquisition and the campaign and going through that entire process, as well as from the contract closeout. So we have the integration with other systems and platforms, ERPs, and SIOP systems as well, and making sure that we're understanding the flow as it's going through and the cutoff point of where we use those other systems, and it integrates with iCertis and the contract lifecycle management solution.
Right. So what are ways that this can all be made more efficient? What are the benefits of having a product like yours in the middle, so to speak, of your whole contracting process?
Well, from an efficiency standpoint, it really is about looking at it from a number of different angles. So it's first about the process, it's about the data, it's about the people and enabling the teams, and then the system is basically the enabler. So when we're doing any type of improvement or looking at the standard implementation, we look at those other elements first to how can we improve and drive efficiency in the processes, and then looking at the data and the data accuracy, because that's always a challenge, is making sure you have accurate data going into the system and coming out. We always like to say garbage in, garbage out, and that's really key and foundational as you're setting up the system. The system, again, is the enabler, and it really looks at it not only from the information that's going in, but how do we track things like obligations, risk management, and ensure that we're in compliance and closing out the contracts compliantly at the end of that life cycle.
In fact, just beginning at the end here, the closeout is a big issue for a lot of agencies. Sometimes it doesn't happen. What is it, and what has to happen in closeout?
So really, with our platform, it's important to have the integration between the buy and sell side, because that is where you get an appropriate closeout, making sure that you understand what the prime contract has, and then as it flows into the subcontracts, and the subcontracts do their closeout, making sure the purchase orders have all been received, invoiced, and everything is accurate, and then it rolls up to the prime, and then helps with that closeout process of ensuring the integrity and the compliance that all of the requirements have been met in that contract itself.
Yeah, so in other words, all of these other ancillary systems that operate at different phases of a contracting agreement life cycle, let's put it an acquisition, then at some point they all touch on the contract itself, which in theory embodies everything that the government needs.
Exactly.
And the industry has to be able to do its duty, should be in that contract.
Right. And so it's really about that integration too with the other systems, like the ERP system, whether it's an SAP S4, Oracle, whatever it may be, to help with the invoicing and the financial element. And so those will then integrate with the contract lifecycle management solution to help that closeout process.
All right, and then a lot of agencies going to the beginning end of it have contract writing systems. And you think, well, why do they do that? Because every contract's the same. But in fact, doesn't the government have hundreds and hundreds of possible clauses, but it doesn't want each one in each contract, and you have to really pick and choose. And that sounds like a major step all by itself.
Yes, it is a challenge, and it is also very time consuming. So having the ability to pick clauses not only from a clause library, but to use a standard template, and then be able to augment that template with maybe some of those specific clauses that are required given the service or product that is being purchased. And so from the very beginning, you have that ability and that flexibility to select the format and the template that is going to be used then for the actual contract and negotiation. Also giving you options if a customer or a supplier takes exception to any of those clauses, you have the ability then to provide alternate solutions for that clause itself.
Got it. So it might be that, for example, the agency has to write a clause sometimes. Maybe the library doesn't have every possible contingency in the world. And so can that be inculcated into this? The
Yes.
ability to add something that maybe didn't exist before?
Right. Using free-form text, being able to create alternate solutions for certain clauses or things that haven't been utilized, like you said, before. And then there's also the artificial intelligence and the Gen AI aspect of that can come in and start recommending clauses or recommending wording that hasn't been used previously, or for that specific customer, or something that gives you an alternate to look forward to.
So the algorithm then would have to know. So you have to train it with the type of contract it is, because there's many forms of contracts. Cost plus and fixed price contracts, task orders under IDIQs, task orders under GWACs. I mean, it's like dozens and dozens of possible combinations.
So just like any artificial intelligence, it's about teaching it and learning. So we have some algorithms that we are currently using, and we're training and teaching models existing, but then also within certain entities where they need to have everything isolary, we also then work with and ensure that there's the training on their specific terms and conditions, so it's not exposed externally. So very isolated in those instances, but definitely having that ability to look for and use alternate language is really helpful for customers when you're negotiating with suppliers, to ensure that you're getting and optimizing the language, and also looking at it from a risk-based approach. You've got to be able to evaluate the risk that's within the agreement and really determine how balanced that risk is, because we really don't want something that is out of balance.
Interesting. Well, let's go back even further. What are the pain points of contracting, contract writing, contract administration, and contract closeout? What do you see them struggling the most with in the government?
Well, let's focus first. So there's a lot of trends, we'll just say. So there's some focus areas that efficiency is definitely one. And then looking to be more compliant is another. And then the third one that I like to look at is the mitigation and reduction of risk. And so as we're going through the process, we keep those elements in mind, because those are really some of the key pain points that we are continuing to see across the government industries, across commercial industries. And so doing that and looking at the pain points that then affect and impact all of the companies and sub-tier suppliers that we're working with. Just kind of, some examples with the CHIPS Act and semiconductors and things that we've gone through over the past few years and having to deal with that. We really did come out of that looking at the contract differently. How do we mitigate the risk? What are the ramifications of the inability to get parts from a certain supplier, cost increases, and how do we utilize the contract to its fullest extent possible?
I guess you could say the inflation of the last few years is a factor that probably nobody anticipated, but it's certainly been a topic of discussion.
Yes, definitely a topic of discussion, and something you've got to consider in your contracts as well. What is the impact? What are the implications? Some have inflationary adjustments within their contracts and others don't. And a lot of times people will execute an agreement and put it in a desk drawer. Having that ability in a CLM to provide notification when something is out of balance or something has come up that needs to be flagged, there is that visual aspect of it, that it's right in front of you, instead of relying on something that somebody's put into a file or a SharePoint and doesn't look at except when they need to.
Yeah, that's what they call shelfware.
Absolutely.
All
Yes.
right. Well, I want to get to all three of those pain points as you put them and maybe pull them apart a little bit. Right now, though, we'll take a short break.
Okay.
My guest is Kim Miller. She's the Vice President of Industry Advisory at iCertis. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin here on Federal Insights, Contract Management Modernization, sponsored by iCertis here on Federal News Network. Welcome back to Federal Insights, Contract Management Modernization, sponsored by iCertis here on Federal News Network. My guest today is Kim Miller. She's the Vice President of Industry Advisory at iCertis. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin and your moderator today. And I want to run through the pain points of federal contracting. And again, you've had a good view of this from the contractor side. So usually what's bad for one side is bad for the other, vice versa. So it's really, kind of a continuum here. But efficiency, what is the meaning of efficiency in contracting, contract administration?
Right. So there's a couple different things as far as the efficiency goes, and it really is looking at it from the total digitization. There are a number of companies and agencies that are looking to modernize and drive efficiency. So paper and the old way of doing things is not usually the most efficient. And so trying to bring it into the 21st century, making sure that we're able to track, monitor, provide metrics, and simplifying and streamlining jobs. When you have the contracting officers having to monitor the contracts for compliance and ensuring every aspect and obligation within the contract is performed, it's very time consuming. When you have the ability to actually have a system do that for them, and then that have the individuals or the contracting officers monitor and track, it really is an enabler and an efficiency driver. So looking at it from that specific area, and then also the flow of the information, going from a contract lifecycle management solution that has your pricing, that has your statement of work, that has the key terms that need to flow into your purchasing system for your purchase requisition and your purchase orders, that there is also a driver of efficiency, and also removes the errors that could occur based on the human actually doing the keying or the inputting.
It makes you wonder how many errors happen that nobody ever knows about.
Yes, absolutely. That is something that is very hard to track and provide metrics on, because, like you said, you don't know how many are actually out there because of the manual aspect of it. And when you have the technology and have that ability to track and trace and provide metrics specifically from the system, it really does drive that efficiency.
Yeah, and so I guess the implication there is that throughout the contract lifecycle, there is additional input information on that performance, pricing, deliveries, and so on, such that the agency can monitor contractor performance. It sounds like what you're saying is that with greater efficiency and a more streamlined process, you would have faster and more accurate contractor assessments that benefit both the government and the contractor, I would think.
Correct, especially when you're doing audits, when you have a CPSR. It also goes back to what we were talking about earlier around the contract closeout, because you've been continuously monitoring and tracking that throughout the life cycle of that contract. Then when it comes time for the closeout, you actually have everything pretty much completed. You've monitored and tracked performance throughout that life cycle, and you have that summary at the end.
Who knows, maybe the audit wouldn't take 12 years by the time you're done. Right?
Exactly, because the information will all be contained within the platform. You have all of the purchase order connection, the contract, and all of the supporting documentation that is necessary.
All right, let's talk about mitigation of risk. That is where that's where everything comes together.
Right.
And you would think that with carefully done contracts with clear terms and conditions, deliveries and so forth, and a contractor that was selected on the basis of a great bid, why should anything be so risky?
Well, like you stated earlier, inflation is one area. You have different conflicts that are happening across the world. And as we're looking at materials just in general, the environment and the global environment that we're operating in is risky. There's always things that could happen. There's tornadoes, there's hurricanes, there's earthquakes that could impact that supply chain. So the ability to identify and integrate that risk within a contract lifecycle management solution and then providing a potential response or mitigation action based on the contract is really a game changer. It really enables the supplier, the customer, then to take action that they may not have been able to react as quickly as they can, and also understand their contractual rights and the obligations if something does happen.
That sounds like a good application of an algorithm, because if you can see all the subs and the subs have addresses, and if the address is Taiwan here or somewhere in South America there, or even, who knows, in fire or flood blown, you could build a model of risk that might give you earlier warning of what it is you need to worry about.
Correct. And there's a number of risk platforms that are out there that exist today that do exactly as you stated, give you those identifiers as far as risk elements that could impact your business. That coupled with the ability to look at the contract and the implications of the contract, again, is really a game changer.
All right, and compliance is the third point that people have trouble with, and the administration's, successively, the number of compliance factors just seems to go up and up and up. Mm-hmm. You've got climate mitigation, is there a gas stove in the company kitchen? DEI requirements, SBA, of course, that's been around in compliance with, it goes on and on.
Yes.
So talk about the compliance and how some automation and streamlining can help that process.
Right. So the cybersecurity and small business are just a couple of the areas that really are a trend and impact today, especially within the businesses. All of the different diverse organizations that they need to track to that we're doing that. Coming from industry, small business and small business tracking was always a challenge because we didn't have the systems in place to actually track all of the information. So it was an Excel spreadsheet, it was a manual effort, and the teams were asked on a quarterly or semi-annual basis to go collect certain data. And then they would have to roll it up and then provide it to the corporate level, who would then also roll it up. And it usually took at least a good month in advance that we had to request the information to get it. With the system, they're able then to make the request in the system. It's readily available. We know which suppliers are small business suppliers. We know which are small diverse businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned, and it has the ability to roll all of that information up seamlessly and then provide that as a report that can then be turned into the Small Business Association.
Yeah, okay, so that you can be ahead of them before they find you.
Exactly. And you can track and make sure that you're on track to meet your goals for the year, because that's the other thing that's really important is how are we trending and do we have to take additional actions to make sure we're compliant?
All right, and I wanted to ask you about the idea of trends. That is, I'll put it a better way, there's a lot of data in contracts, and there's even more data in the accumulation of contracts that an agency generates over time. It strikes me there must be wisdom in all of that data that's kind of latent once the contract is closed out, or maybe it's near the end, that could be useful in some manner. What have you found there? Data mining of the totality of contracting.
Yeah, and it really is, again, the government and the contracting and the access to the data and the information is really kind of separated because we want to make sure the security of that. From a commercial space and anonymizing the data, we're able to gather and I would say scrape and get a lot of information that is good information to accumulate, and so we can learn and teach the models so that they look for certain key things within the contract as we're going forward.
Because the system for rating contractors, everybody gets good or above, or it's kind of like the way they rate people. It's maybe a 5-point scale or a 4-point scale. 5 points even worse because everyone gets in the middle, and so you don't really get any insight. seems to me on deliveries, on pricing adherence, and other quality measures that you can quantify, if you had this kind of data that could be ferreted out by some kind of an algorithm, that would be superior to the official, database of contractor information that the government uses.
Right. And, a lot of decisions are made from a contracting perspective in the government side based on performance. So they're looking at the quality, the delivery, the overall performance rating of a supplier, to your point there. They're really analyzing that to make sure that they're adhering to those. And right now they're tracking it, and a number of OEMs have that standard in place. But this also gives you the ability to integrate it within the contract and look at the performance from the contract perspective as well. And then how they're performing from a supplier perspective, and give, like you said, an overall rating and evaluation of that.
And a big issue, a recurring issue, and there's even been NDAA language directed toward getting this out of the system, and that is PALT, the procurement acquisition lead time, which is frustrating for everybody, especially especially in the DoD, they're trying to respond to a changing world quickly. Maybe just in the last minute we have, talk about PALT and how this kind of automation can help with that.
Yeah, so taking a look at the different ranges, whether it's 20 days allowed or 208 days, it really takes a look at what is the authority level, what is the value of the requirements, that spend that's going to be made, and then provides that metrics and that analysis of the flow also. So it's monitoring and tracking to those 20 days, to those 208 days, to make sure that you're still complying and in adherence, and really trying to streamline the flow all the way from the requirements gathering through the solicitation, also through the requirements, execution, and solicitation, and making sure we're adhering to that time frame.
Yes, requirements, that's a pain point we didn't talk about, but that's where things usually get off the rail, starting at the requirement stage.
Yes, and the changes as well. So having good requirements in any type of solicitation and acquisition process is foundational, and then making sure that those requirements are strong requirements, because the change and the impact of that down the road really does impact the whole supply chain.
So it starts with the meatware, not the software.
Yes, it does. Very true.
All right, great discussion. Thanks so much for your insight. My guest today has been Kim Miller, the Vice President for Industry Advisory at iCertis. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search iCertis.